Okay, good morning. Let's start today. We'll start today on our stomach. So lying down flat. As you come down onto your stomach, you can stack the hands one on top of the other, and that typically gives us enough space for the neck. So you rest the forehead down. Another option, if that feels like it's too low for whatever reason, you could make fists and stack one on top of the other and do it that way. For me, that's definitely way too high. Just giving you those options. And close the eyes. You're trying to touch that part of the forehead that touches down when you're in a child's pose. So try to find that spot. There's we all have this like flat spot that might not be perfectly center in our forehead. It might be a little off to the side or higher or lower, but there's a spot that feels good when you connect with it. Start to deepen the breath. So take a deeper breath in through the nose. Feel the back side of the body move when you do that. Slow breath out through the nose. 2 more like that together. Big breath in. Slow breath out. Deep inhale. As long as you can, exhale. Keep going on your own, finding your breath rhythm. You've been practicing yoga for 1 minute and notice how much has changed, even though you've hardly moved. Sometimes we get so hung up on physical activity that we forget the importance of being still, being present, just taking a time out, catching our breath, building a deeper relationship with yourself. So as you're lying down on your stomach, breathing, you're in a slight back bend. You don't have to do any work, so make sure the legs are relaxed, which might mean that the ankles turn out a little bit. Maybe the big toes start to point in. You'll start to lift the head. Bring the arms out to the sides, just like a cactus shape. So you're bending at the elbows. Hands are pointing forward. With the head lifted, bring the left knee out to the left. Inner edge of the foot is down on the ground. And the knees maybe hip height, maybe it's lower. It just depends on how open that hip is. I wouldn't go higher than hip height. And then bring the right side of the head down onto the mat. So the nose and that left knee are going in the same direction. You can close the eyes. Resting here, and you might feel a deeper opening happening across the chest, maybe that inner left thigh, maybe the hip. And this one won't be a long hold. We will come back to it a little later. We're just coming here to prep us for the next pose. We'll do this on this side And we'll slowly start to make our way over to the other side. So lifting the head, stretching the left leg back behind you. Bring the right knee outside of the hip. It can always be lower. Inner edge of the foot is down, toes turn out. And then turn the head so that you can rest the left side of the head down onto the mat. You can let yourself be heavy. There's really no need to hold yourself anywhere. You'll start to lift the head up. Bring the right leg back behind you. And now bring the elbows in underneath you. So elbows and forearms are shoulder width distance apart. Legs are back behind you. Tops of the feet are on the mat. You don't have to press in to the tops of the feet too hard. And then it's up to you how high you lift the chest. So as you point the tailbone back, chest is reaching. So think about the chest going forward more than up. So start with forward first, almost like those shoulder blades are trying to push the chest between the arms. And then you can find a little bit of a lift, but remember it's yin. So you're trying not to go into the deepest back bend in your body. You're trying to find some ease in the pose and Sphinx pose. So maybe you release the chest a little bit. Let yourself warm up to a deeper back bend. And the gaze goes down the bridge of the nose. So you want to keep the neck long. Sometimes we look forward to get the chest forward, but see if you can look down. Maybe even close the eyes, but if closing the eyes makes the whole upper body collapse, then avoid that and just stay looking down. Looking down so much that maybe the eyes are almost closed. Listen to the sound of your own breath. And if at any point you need a break from this pose, you just come back to where we started. So resting the hands one on top of the other, forehead on top of the hands. And you're still in a gentle back bend even when you do that resting. And then you just come back in whenever you feel ready. But this pose in particular for me in my own personal practice took a while for me to build up the length of time and the hold. I did need to take breaks at first, so don't feel like you have to fight through it. Five more breaths here. And from Sphinx pose, lower the chest so you can bring the hands down to the mat. You'll come up to hands and knees, tabletop. You might need to walk the knees in so that the hips stay right over the knees. You want this vertical length of the thigh. Elbows will come back down to the mat. We're coming into melting heart pose. If that doesn't work with you, you can stick with Sphinx, maybe take a break and go back into it, or take breaks while you're in the pose. So from here, you start to walk the elbows forward and bring the forehead down to the ground. But notice if the hips are going ahead of the knees. If that's happening, you need to bring them back. So when you bring the hips forward, you take away the opening in the upper body. That's why it's important to keep the hips right where they are over the knees. So finding an easy shape with this, the farther forward the elbows go, the more intense this is, and you're not trying to go as deep as you possibly can. So you're the only one that knows what that is in your body. Give yourself plenty of space away from your edge. Hug the belly in a little bit. Come back to the breath and to stillness. You're in this shape, just be here. And you'll start to lift the head, walk the hands back in. So you're coming back to tabletop on hands and knees, stacking the shoulders over the wrists, hips over the knees. Let's take a few rounds of cat cow just to open up the spine a little bit more. So on the inhale, reach the heart forward, lift the tail. And on the exhale, rounding the whole spine, scooping the belly in a little bit, making some space with the lower back. And then inhale, reach the heart forward, and exhale round. So keep going at your own pace. You don't need to stay with me. Eyes can be closed if you're comfortable with that. So you can just stay inside your own body and feel what's happening there. So a couple of back bends. The inhale for your cow pose might feel a little better than your exhale, but the rounding of the spine is a nice way to get the spine back to kind of where it was. And one more inhale forward, exhaling back to tabletop. Let's get into the wrists and the hands since we're here. Take the right hand. Well, I'll give you a couple options. So option A, you bring the fingertips to point in toward the center of the mat. So the back of the hand is on the ground. And if that feels okay, maybe you shift the hips back and bring the back of the left hand down on the mat. So if I bring my hips back, it's less weight on the hands and the wrists. You could start to stack the shoulders closer to being over the wrist. You'll feel that's a lot more pressure. If that's working for you, great. If it's not, you can just bring the hands back down to the mat, and maybe you turn the fingertips, keep the palms down and turn the fingertips to the outer edges of the mat. So either one works. It's a different hip opening, different wrist opening. If you have, once you figure out where you want the hands, you could start to take some circles, go slow with the shoulders over the wrists. Hips can still stay back, so you can apply as much pressure as you want as you open up the backs of the hands, wrists, forearms. Fingers are still spread, so you have a wide hand. And then if you're taking those circles, go the other way, reverse the direction of the circles, still staying slow so you can feel how this is landing in your body. And you'll come back to center wherever the hands are, bring the palms down with the fingertips pointing forward. And then if you didn't already, turn the fingertips out to the sides. If you already did that, you could play with turning the hands all the way around, see if that works. So fingertips out to the sides if you haven't done that already. And then now you can take circles. And you'll be able to get the shoulders more over the wrists with this one. So you might be able to get the shoulders ahead of the wrists, come back, and go the other way with your circles. Feels so different with the palms down instead of the palms up. And coming back to center, turn the hands forward so the fingertips point forward. Walk the hands forward ahead of the shoulders and then shift forward onto the knees. Set yourself down. You're coming back to lying on your stomach again. And we're back in that shape that we did before. Elbows out to the side, fingertips point forward. So cactusing the arms. Look to the left. Left knee comes out to the left. Inner edge of the foot comes down. Set the right side of the head down onto the ground. And you could stay like this. You could also turn the head the other way. So bringing the left side of the head down onto the mat. See how that feels on the neck? It doesn't work for all of us. If it works for you, stay there. You're getting a twist in addition to the hip opening, which is always nice after back bends. And if you have the left side of the head down on the ground, or the nose turning away from that left knee, lift the head and turn it back around. So you bring the right side of the face down to the ground, giving the neck a bit of a release before we transition. And you'll start to lift the head up, bring the left leg back behind you. Keep the arms cactus, look to the right. Right knee comes outside of the hip or maybe lower. Inner edge of the foot is down and the toes are turned out. Set the left side of the head down onto the ground. And we start here first. Just try to find the shape in your body, see how it feels. And now that you're here, if you'd like to lift the head and turn it to the left, you're welcome to. So nose points away from the knees and you feel a slight twist going all the way up through the cervical spine. So where the neck is. And if at any point it becomes too much, just turn the head the other way. And if you have the nose turned away from that right knee, simply lift the head, turn it the other way, resting the left side of the head down onto the mat or ground. And we'll all lift the head up. Bring that right knee back behind you. So the legs are back behind you. Hands come down just next to the rib cage. Come back up to hands and knees. So once you come up to hands and knees, well, it'll look like child's pose, but it's actually called tadpole. And the difference is big toes together, knees go wider than child's pose. So you want to be so wide that the torso can fit between the thighs. So hips can come back. Walk the hands forward and then rest the forehead down onto the mat. So it's a deeper hip opening. If you have any lower back stuff, you'll want some support underneath the torso. So that's where props would be a good idea. You could take a bolster and use that between the thighs and then just turn the head one way. And that should give you enough lift or support. If it doesn't, for whatever reason, or you don't have a yoga prop to use and your lower back is bothering you, bring the knees closer together, as close as you need to give that space to the lower back. So that might be all the way together and that's fine. but we are trying to get back into the inner thighs and hips again, still staying in the upper body a little bit. So elbows are resting down on the mat, hands are ahead of the head. If that's too much for the upper body, you can always stack the hands and rest the head on top of the hands. That works too. And I didn't mention it this class, but in this shape, we definitely want to make sure that the knees are quiet. So if they're talking to you, just lift the hips up as high as you need to. Still staying in the same shape wherever you are is good. And then if you are lifting up the hips higher, it's a little harder to get the forehead down. So you could make fists and stack them. Maybe that's the right height. Or take a block, pillow, blanket. But touching the forehead down is important for our relaxation. You'll start to lift the head, come back up onto the hands. And if you are using a yoga mat, just turn to face the side. So knees are still on the mat, hands are off the mat. If you're not using a yoga mat, you don't really need to change your orientation unless you need more space. If you are using a yoga mat, take the ends of the yoga mat and just bring them in about a third of the way each side. And you'll bring the hands back down in front of the shoulders off the mat if you're using one. Knees start to widen a little bit. And then once you get them kind of wide, turn the toes out. Inner edges of the feet land down. So toes turn away from you. And then you'll start to play with how wide you want the knees to go. So the last one was tadpole. This one's frog. So stay away from your edge. Some of us are really tight on the inner thighs and the hips opening up this way. If that's you, don't go down that low. Also, another thing to know, if the hips are right in line with the knees, that's a deeper version of the pose. If you bring the hips back behind the knees or ahead of the knees, that gets a little easier. So that's another lever you can pull. Maybe the hands stay right underneath the shoulders and this is good. But if you start to bring the chest down, that also gets a little bit more intense. So see what that feels like. If it's an option, coming down onto the forearms could be nice. You could make fists with the hands, stack them one on top of the other and rest the forehead on top of the hands. Props are good too here if you have them. You could put a bolster underneath you the long way underneath the torso, and that could be nice support. Blocks could also replace the two fists of the hands, resting the forehead down. So we know if we can touch the forehead on something that relaxes the whole body. But sometimes the forehead's nowhere near relaxing on something, and that's fine too. So the reason why we folded up the yoga mat on each side, if you have one, is because it just adds a little extra padding on the knees. But some of you are on carpet and don't really need it. So just know that that was the goal. Blankets work too. And this is one of those poses that the body will start to move around and shift until it finds a place where it can be still. And that probably means the hips going forward or back. And that's fine. Don't feel like you have to be diligent about keeping the hips in line with the knees. It's yin. We're not as focused on form in yin. We want to find the shape of the pose, but a soft version of it. And some of you might be able to get all the way down with the hips, knees out wide, inner thighs touching, and that might be really relaxing for you. I'm not able to demonstrate that. This is a tougher pose for me personally. You'll start to find patterns with these poses where it's a similar shape, but we put weight on the body in a different way. And we're all so different with how we live in our bodies that some poses work better than others. Well, I take that back. They all work, but some feel like more of a struggle than others do. Keep those inhales and exhales steady in and out through the nose. And you'll start to lift the head. Bring yourself back up onto the hands slowly, and you'll start to inch the knees closer together until you can bring them all the way back together. If you're using a mat, unfold the mat so that it's back to its regular shape, and you'll come back to seated on the mat with the legs out in front of you. I'm just going to bring my blocks closer in case I want them. So legs out in front of you, seated tall. So we'll come into a seated forward fold, but don't think about a long, straight spine. You can round the spine here and even turn the hands to face up. So you're not so focused on where you're reaching. You can let the hands rest on the legs and slowly just start to inch forward into a forward fold. Spine will round, close the eyes. Closing the eyes is nice. So that way you don't really think about where you are. You're just folding in. Hands continue to reach forward until you feel like this is an easy place for me to be in this posture. And this is called caterpillar and yin. So a lot of different ways that we can use the props. I'll walk you through them. If you're good right where you are, stay there. If you're starting to feel any discomfort or looking for a different option, I'll take you through some. So you could take blocks, putting one block the narrow height between the legs, and then maybe another block, and you can rest the forehead down, and that's a nice way to rest there. If your lower back is bothering you, you could take a bolster, bringing the bolster right on top of the legs, all the way in against the stomach, and then fold forward that way. Maybe you take a block and rest the head on the block. This feels really nice too. And that just gives you a little bit more support. So those are a couple of options. Also propping the hips up on something. So sitting on a blanket or a bolster or a block could be nice too.
So once we get comfortable with hanging out in a pose, you start to feel how you make some space. So maybe you're feeling the back start to spread. Maybe the backside of the legs start to open. Maybe even the glutes. You'll slowly start to come back up. Take your time, just coming back up to seated, and you'll bring the legs in, bending the knees. Scoot yourself forward if you're on a mat and come down onto your back. So, soles of the feet still on the mat, head resting down. Let's hug the right knee in toward the chest and extend the left leg out in front of you. So if this bothers your lower back, then just bring both knees in toward the chest and you'll keep the knees together the whole time. If you feel okay with the left leg extended out in front of you, take this right knee, cross it over to the left, coming into an easy, gentle twist. So not your deepest twist. Right arm, that might mean that the right arm reaches out to the side. You could reach the right arm up overhead, or maybe the right arm is just down by the side of the body, if that's gentle for you. And if this bothers your lower back and you just have the one knee, bring the knees together and that'll give you more space. You could even put a block between the knees and that'll also bring more space to the lower back. So there's always a ton of modifications and alternatives to these poses. And it's good to know them for when you need them. Sometimes you might not now, but there might be a time in the future where they're good to check in with and maybe try. Eyes can be closed or softly open. And then see where the head's naturally landing. So that might mean that the nose is still pointing over to the left. Maybe the nose is pointing up. For a deeper variation, the nose is going to the right, but you're staying away from your edge. So don't go all the way into this twist. You'll make your way onto your back, soles of the feet on the mat, knees bent. And we were there for a while. So let's counter pose that twist. So you'll bring the knees in toward the chest, one hand on each knee. Keep the knees and the feet together as you bring the knees around in a circle. So it won't be that big of a movement. You're just feeling the back of the hips move around on the ground underneath you. You're going in the same direction with the circles. And now you'll reverse the direction of the circles, going the other way. And bring the left knee in toward the chest, set the right foot down. Let that rest on the mat or the ground underneath you. And now you can extend the right leg out in front of you. See how that feels, particularly in the lower back. If it doesn't feel good, bring that right knee in and keep the knees together as you come over into the twist. If you have one leg and it feels fine, bring the left knee over across the body and the left arm, maybe that reaches out to the side, maybe up overhead, maybe down by the side. See where you feel like it's an easy place to be. Eyes softly open or closed. Knees can always come together whenever you want. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but if you're way off, get the head, the right hip, right foot somewhat in line. And we'll start to come back onto our back, soles of the feet to the mat, knees bent. Bring the knees in toward the chest, one hand on each knee. Keep the knees together. See if you can start the circles in the opposite way of the way you typically go. Feeling the backside of the hips, move around on the mat as you make these circles with the hands on the knees. And now reverse the direction, going the other way. Such a nice way to massage this part of the body. Okay, so bring the knees back in toward the chest, and then you'll open up the knees wide, coming into happy baby. So you can grab onto the backs of the thighs, calves, ankles, inner or outer edges of the feet, but we are doing a full hold with this pose. So make sure wherever you are, you can rest the head down onto the ground. And you want those hips to be down on the ground too. So sometimes the tail wants to curl up, and that helps us reach a farther away place on the legs and the feet. So maybe you back off with whatever you're hanging on to with the hands. And then ideally, this isn't possible for all of us, but for some of us, we can easily get the knees wider than the torso. And that gives you a deeper hip opening. So we've been playing with this shape with this practice today of knees going wide to open up the hips. Feet are flexed, so over the knees, soles of the feet point up, no matter what you're hanging on to with the hands. Belly is soft, chest is open, still staying with your breath. And if you feel like you've committed with the hands too deep into the pose, then you just back off. Maybe you grab the ankles, calves, or you can work your way back to the backs of the thighs right behind the knees. That feels good too. Happy baby is a pose that usually comes at the end of class. You have to be open for it. It's not something you would start with. It's a little too big of a pose to open. Sometimes you'll do half happy baby, and that can sometimes feel good. But at the end of class, it's nice because your body's warm, it's open, but it can also build over time. So we typically don't hold happy baby this long outside of a yin class. But it's really effective. And some of you might feel a nice spreading of the back with the back on the mat, especially with the hips down. All right, let's bring the knees in toward the chest. That was a big one. You can rock side to side with the knees coming in toward the chest. You don't need to pull them in that tight. And set the feet down onto the mat. Extend the legs out in front of you, and you can let the legs go wider than hip width distance, toes turn out, arms down by the sides, close the eyes. Maybe you lift the chest up a little bit so the shoulders don't feel like they're going up toward the ears. And you start to come into your final relaxation pose, Shavasana. If you have something to cover the eyes, that could be nice. And if you want to take a different version of Shavasana using props, you're welcome to do that too. There are days though where even if you have props, just keeping it really simple can feel nice. And after that long, happy baby hold, it might be really comforting to just have the legs extended out in front of you, feeling that release on the inner thighs, top of the hips, and the overall length of the body and space you made within it. You'll start to wiggle the fingers and the toes. Taking a deeper breath in through the nose. Back out. Reach the arms overhead, finding a stretch, waking yourself up again. And starting to walk the feet in. Rolling over to one side. So cradling the head and the arm, keeping the eyes closed. Such a nice way to transition from being on your back for a few minutes to lying on your side. Rather than just bringing yourself up all the way, that's a little bit harsher of a transition. So being gentle as we work our way back into the day. So using that top hand, press yourself up to an easy cross-legged seat. If the legs don't feel comfortable cross, they don't have to be. So however you're comfortable, seated on the ground, sitting up tall, keep the eyes closed, find that long spine here. So you are putting some effort into this, hugging the belly in, shoulders down the back, bring the hands together in front of you. Keep that lift of the chest as you start to bow the head, taking a moment to honor and acknowledge your heart and spirit, as well as everyone around you. Bring the head back up, blink open the eyes. Namaste. Thank you. So yin practices, while you're not moving quickly and you're moving very slowly, it can be very mental, especially if some of those poses present any kind of a challenge. And what you'll find is the more your yin practice starts to deepen, it starts to carry on into other areas of your life. So maybe you'll find yourself doing something completely different that is physically challenging, and you'll find the mental wherewithal to stay calm with it. And hopefully, this is because you don't realize, I think, when it happens, but somebody might tell you like, wow, you seem so calm when you're doing that. And then you start linking everything back together and you're like, well, I'm practicing that on a regular basis with these yin type classes. So just pointing that out in case it helps anyone. I'll see you next week.